Okay, so today we are going to explore a story that I would call a story of transformation of a young woman, a Canaanite woman named Tamar, and one of Jacob's sons, Judah. Today there will not be any violence, no rape, just betrayal, disaffection, guilt, exile, death, grief, and risky sexual behaviors. So that still should keep us interested. I want to say a word before we start looking at the text about names. I'm sure, as you are students of Torah for many, many years, that you're aware that very often a name in the Tanakh has significance. The significance either reflects the parent's state of mind at the time of naming the child, or the parent's hopes for what type of human being the child will be, but it also is sometimes a foreshadowing of the child's future. Take a moment to think about your name that you were given and the names you gave your children. And am I right? Take a moment while it occurred to me. So I don't know if you know this, but I have 6 names. Bracha, Esther, Tzipora. Anybody want to say what they are in English? Not any relative of mine, not Nechama or Tzipora? Shelley, you got to know. Ellen Zweig, if not Beer Mom. Nobody?
Blythe.
Okay. Blythe, Esther, Melody. So at the time that I was named, your former chazan, former rabbi, at that time, he was teaching literature, English literature, and I was meant to be Blythe Spirit, though I spell it differently. And I've been spelling that name more in Israel than I ever did, to be honest. And Blythe means happy. Esther, I was named after, I think, my grandmother's sister. And Melody, well, we can all figure that out. When it got to Nechama, she's Nechama Maxine, named after my maternal grandfather. And Nechama means comfort, and anyone who knows Nechama knows she is that. And when it came to David, they had to be a little modest with their hopes because his names are David Yisrael. They really wanted to put Melech in between those two. David, Melech, Yisrael. Anyway, so names do. And I'm sure we'd have a lot of fun, and we went around trying to understand your names or the names you gave. But we won't do that. So as we begin in chapter 38, this is immediately following chapter 37, right? And in that previous chapter, we have just seen the selling of Joseph. I trust that everybody remembers that. His father, the man that we all loved last week, favored him, and et cetera, et cetera. They were going to kill Joseph. Judah, who was 4th from oldest, he suggests we don't have to kill him, but let's sell him. Reuben had said, okay, we'll put him in the pit, and he planned on coming back and taking him out, but his plan was squashed. At that point, Judah leaves his brothers, his father, feeling that he belongs in exile. What he did was not particularly a good thing, and we're told through Midrashim that his brothers came down on him. Once Yehuda went to Jacob he was given that responsibility and showed him that coat of many colors drenched in blood, he saw how depressed his father was. And the Midrash says that his brothers said to him, you know, you're our older brother. If you would have said, let's not do this, we would have listened to you. Now, they don't want the responsibility of feeling that they had something to do with this. So he's feeling totally rejected, and he decides he's leaving. He can't see his father that way, and I'm about to share with you the text. Okay? So as usual, we will read very closely. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned into a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. Now, in Hebrew, Vayered, went down. It's taken to be both literally and, of course, metaphorically. But physically, the village that he goes to is south of where he has been living. And he makes a friend from that tribe, Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And he took her and went unto her. What is this woman's name? Anybody?
I assume it's Tamar, even though it says her name is Shua.
I don't know that I've ever said this to you, Bev, but this time you're wrong.
Okay.
No, not Tamar. What does it say? No, that's the point. What does it say? Does it say her name?
Name was Shua.
No, her name is not Shua. What does it say there, guys? But.
Oh, the Canaanite man was Shua.
But Ish Kanani Shmo Shua. She is the daughter of Shua. Now, why did I belabor that? In about 3 minutes, you will understand why. Okay? So he looks at her, he takes her, and in this sense, take her is not like last week where it meant abduction. This week it means he married her. Pasuk Gimel. She conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Er. Now, Er, if you look at the Hebrew ayin resh, some of you might be aware that Er can mean two opposing things. It can mean awaken, but it can also mean barrenness. It can mean energetic, and it can mean evil. Keep that in mind. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan, which means sorrow. So you're beginning to see why I wanted to explain the significance of names. And she yet again bore a son and called him Shelah. And he, which means error. These are great names. And he was at Chziv when she bore him. 3 sons with names that make you very curious. And Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name now was Tamar. So if we juxtapose that with Bat Shua, Very interesting that Tamar rates having her name be explicitly said, while Judah's wife does not. We'll see if there's significance beyond that later on. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked. And you can see Ra, if you look at the Hebrew, in Pasuk Zion, which is just mixing the two letters, the ayin and the resh, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Okay, now, the question will be, what made him wicked? Hold on. Notice also that nothing is said about Tamar's background. It's suggested that she perhaps was a descendant of the priesthood of the Canaanite tribe she was part of, and that could be important later on. But anybody want to recall the beautiful tune we sing at Kabbalat Shabbat with the word Tamar in it? Tzadika Tamar Yifrach. Well, that means the righteous person flourishes like a tamar, a date palm. A palm tree grows straight, tall, even amidst an arid desert, which comes to say much about Tamar. She lived within a tribe that was not a Hebrew tribe, but she was very highly respected, even in the eyes of the Hebrews.
Oh God, Isaac.
Okay, now, let's try to figure out what are possibilities as to why was considered bad. We're not given information here. And the Midrash and the Talmud tries to fill in gaps. Now, when they do that, they're not doing that just haphazardly, but they'll base it on precedents, et cetera, et cetera. So we won't go there. So what is a possibility for why he was bad? Anybody? And so bad that he dies. We're told maybe a few weeks after they're married. Anybody?
Perhaps he became an idol worshiper, like the people with whom he was with.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm glad you said that. Because it's not for that reason. What?
Was he a murderer? We don't know.
You don't know. Okay, but let's see what we get out of as we go on. Chet. And Judah said unto Onan, his younger brother, go in unto your brother's wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her and raise up seed to thy brother. What is that responsibility called?
That levirate marriage?
Exactly. Okay, so simply put, if you
Yibum?
have,
Is that Yibum? Yes.
Yivum.
Yes.
If you have a widow and she's still as of age to bear a child, if there is a brother or if not a close relative that could father a child with her, then that relative is obligated to do that. Now, the essential reason for that is not to just help out a widow, but to keep the legacy of the deceased alive, plus the land that was in the family to ensure that it remains in the family. So Judah and that was accepted in those times, is right on when he tells his son to do that. And he's very specific because he says the reason, raise up seed to your brother. And Onan knew, Pasuk Tet, verse 9, that the seed would not be his. And it came to pass, when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother. In other words, he didn't want to have a child if it wasn't really going to be his. The Talmud, in talking about both these brothers, says the evil act they did had to do with their sexual behaviors with Tamar. Not that it wasn't in marriage. No, it was. But both of them, in perhaps different ways, withheld the seed from entering her. One felt he could get away with it because she was inexperienced. The other didn't care. Now, what both of them did was, first of all, that was deceitful to a woman who thinks that they are going to father her child. But it also was against God in that you're not meant to do that, and you're supposed to fulfill the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply, pru urvu. But both of them, whether it's Onan, we're told he wanted to keep his wife desirable and thin, he really wasn't into it. But God is so upset with their behavior that he kills both of them. Verse 10, and the thing which he did was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he killed him too. And just to say one more word, if Onan knew that he was not going to father a child, he was going to prevent that from happening, then in fact, he was committing incest. The only time the familial relationship was okay and it wasn't considered with the incestual taboo was if it was because you were doing this to keep your brother's legacy alive. Okay, so God kills them. God killing for something like that, that's another class. Okay, I know who I'm dealing with, so I don't want to let you raise that right now. Okay. Verse 11. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house. In other words, leave here, go back to your home till Shelah, my son, be grown up. Now, before reading the rest of that pasuk, how does that strike you? What would be a reason or reasons that Yehuda would suggest that? Does it seem like a terrible thing that he would suggest that? Don't forget, you have to unmute yourself if you want to answer.
No, he was just too young.
Okay.
He's a young boy.
He's too young, and he says that. But he might have still said to Tamar, hang around here. But why might he not want her to be there?
He may not want to be reminded of his obligation.
Wait, I thought you were going to say something. What do you mean by he might not want to be reminded of his obligation?
Okay, like he has the obligation to hand over his son to her. And he is having, I think, his own thoughts that maybe he doesn't want to hand his son over to her to do the the Levirate marriage with his younger son. And he may feel that she'd be more comfortable in her own home, and then he wouldn't have to feel bad that he doesn't have children.
Okay, now, he might not want to be reminded of the two sons who have died, and seeing the widow would do that. But more importantly, I think what Bev was trying to say is that he doesn't want really to hand over his third child to her. He doesn't know what's been going on. Can you blame him for not? He could think that she's spooked. I mean, is she going to do away with my third son? And in fact, what does the end of the pasuk say? Till Shelah, my son, be grown up, for he said, and we believe that he says this to himself, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Now, I just said that you can't blame him to risk losing a third son. But that doesn't say it all, and that doesn't necessarily justify what he just did. He's saving one son, but on the other hand, what is he doing? If he doesn't hand over the third son to her, what is he doing? What is he not allowing to happen?
She will never be able to have to remarry and will have no status.
Okay? But even maybe worse than that, as a father, he is forgetting his responsibility to his eldest. He's ignoring the responsibility to the name of heir by not allowing that to happen. Exactly. So he is choosing between the eldest and the youngest. And that's probably an interesting situation to be in, because the eldest is gone already. So, all right, so his legacy won't be there, but to take a chance on letting my youngest also be gone, perhaps a difficult choice. But you can imagine heir watching from above or maybe from below and saying, Dad, what are you doing? I don't mean anything. Anyway, okay, keep that in mind. Keep everything in mind. Verse 12. And in process of time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. In other words, Judah's wife now dies. He's, by the way, about 41. She dies, which means the Talmud tells us that it's about 2 years that he's been in mourning with all the death around him. And Judah then was comforted, and he went up unto his sheep shearers to Timnah, he and his friend that we met earlier, Hira the Adulamite. Again, Judah is also very wealthy. He has become the leader in raising sheep, highly respected with the Adulamites, where he's been for now a very lengthy time. And he decides it's time to come out of mourning, and it's very appropriate that he's going to go to the sheep shearing festival. 13. And it was told to Tamar, saying, behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So before you read anymore, I'm tricky. What do you think's going to go on in Tamar's mind? And this, where she is at the crossroads. He's got to pass where she is. So what do you think? what would you imagine if you were Tamar, you would do?
Just say, oh, my father-in-law, and greet him, and it's nice to see you, and, the usual, that kind of stuff.
Okay, I don't know what was going
A
to come
visit.
after the usual, but okay. Anybody else? Anybody
Well,
else?
maybe she would approach him and say, well, what's happening here? What, any progress?
You know what? In that day and age, I would have thought that in her mind, she thought that Judah would come to her and give her an update on what was going on, rather
Okay,
than she going to him.
interesting. Okay, so let's see what in fact Tamar decides to do. Keep in mind that it has been 2 years, and she's aware that Judah had said when Sheila's grown up, and in those days, he's grown up already, okay? So let's see. We go back to verse 14. And she put off, we're talking about Tamar, she put off from her garments of widowhood, because, as Marlene said before, she's still a widow, covered herself with her veil, and wrapped herself and sat in the entrance of Enaim. Now, it's interesting. Entrance of Enaim, if you look at the Hebrew, I do this because some of us, I know that you do read the Hebrew, and sometimes there's something, just a little something missing. So it says, Vateshev bepetach Enaim. Ma zeh petach? Poteach? What does liftoach mean?
Opening.
Opening.
The entrance.
Okay? Now, the entrance, Marilyn,
Yeah.
of course, you would say ptichat ha'ir, but as you'll
Gate.
see in a moment, of course, this name has so much in it. It is the crossroad where Judah is going to have to open his eyes, liftoach einayim, ayin, open his eyes, and choose which direction he goes. Anybody there would have to do that. That's what happens at a crossroad. There are signs, and so it's called petach einayim. Not just human beings have significant names. So, why else would it be called Einayim? In thinking of maybe a few people have opened their eyes now. Who? How? Let's proceed and see. Okay? So I'm going to read that again, 14. And she put off from her the garments of her widowhood and covered herself with her veil and wrapped herself and sat in the entrance of Einayim, which is by the way to Timnah, where he's headed for the festival, for she saw that Sheila was grown up. She's aware, and she was not given unto him to wife. So maybe Marlene's right that she expected Yehuda would come to her. Makes sense. And he hasn't done that. So Tamar is not going to just sit around. She takes herself, puts a veil on her, and I'm saying that you'll see why, and she goes to the crossroads. When Judah saw her, now the her, he doesn't know that it's Tamar. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, for she had covered her face. Now, does anybody find that odd? Why would a harlot, a zonah, cover her face? Usually we think that covering your face is a sign of modesty. However, if you didn't know this, first of all, she's sitting at these crossroads by herself. Secondly, there was actually a tradition of prostitutes actually, yes, covering their face because they wanted to hide the brand that had been burnt into their forehead, announcing that they're a zonah. So in this case, even a traditional married woman wouldn't necessarily have had her face covered. So Yehuda puts together the fact that she's there by herself. Even he isn't there by himself. He's with his friend Kira. She's there by herself and her face is covered. So he automatically assumes that she is a harlot because she covered her face. And he turned unto her, by the way, meaning, by the way, is that he saw her, he continues walking, but then he kind of takes a step back and said to her, "Come, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee." For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. That's very conceivable, to use a pun in this context, that if her face is covered, he wouldn't recognize her. And it has been a couple of years, and she at the time was teens, now she's reaching 20. And she said, "What will you give me for me to allow me to paraphrase a little here, what will you give me so that I will allow you to come unto me?" So, what do you think she's doing here? She does not take the option that somebody mentioned of just approaching him. Oh, what Sipporah said, and "Hi, how are you doing? Remember me?" She doesn't do that. What do you think she is doing?
I think she's bargaining.
Bargaining
gonna-
for what?
She's trying to get evidence.
Did you read ahead?
She's-
Okay.
Yeah. We don't know that yet, but she's setting
Okay.
up something.
She's setting up something.
Well,
She
she's a
does
harlot.
not-
I think
Go
she's
ahead.
learned not to trust him already.
She wants to get paid for what she's doing.
Okay, everything you just said, all of that goes together. Yeah, she doesn't trust him because she sees that the third son is of age. Yehud is not bringing him forward, so she does not trust him. Now, another woman could have been very timid and decided, okay, what am I going to do? This is my future. Not Tamar, who we said stands tall. So let's continue. And he said, "I will send you a kid of the goats from the flock." Wouldn't that do it for any of us women, right? If we were promised that? And she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send that?" Meaning, he doesn't have that with him. He figures that's a wonderful gift. But she is no dummy. And she says, "Well, until that arrives, I want something now." And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she said, looking at him, "Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. And he decides, he gave them to her, came in unto her, and she conceived by him. Very quickly. Last week we also mentioned this, that Dinah became pregnant very quickly, unlike Sarah, Rivka, Rachel. And so here we have another case, and there's some message that's being thrown at us with the fact that Dinah, and now this week, Tamar pregnancy comes because in fact she becomes pregnant just from that one first time. Okay. And she arose and went away and put off her veil from her and put back on the garments of her widowhood. She doesn't want this to get out. She hasn't even told the friend who told her that her father-in-law was on his way to Timnah. So she's staying in the role that is expected of her. Judah doesn't forget. He sent the kid of the goats by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of her place, saying, "Where is the harlot that was at Enaim by the wayside?" And they said, "There was no harlot here." He returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." And also the men of the place said, "There has not been a harlot." Now, before we read the next pasuk, the fact that Judah has these relations with what he thinks is a prostitute, did that have any impact on you? Bother you, not bother you? Seem reasonable? Anybody? Come on, we've been talking about this kind of stuff for a few weeks now. So what do you think of Judah?
I thought he was supposed to be in mourning, no?
Well, he just spent 2 years mourning, and now he's gotten up. But I'm glad Sigal said that. And I don't want to be improper. You're thinking, Sigal, it's too soon. Too soon. Okay, anybody else want to
Well,
speak
you
on
know,
his behalf?
society would allow for him to go to a harlot rather than finding a new wife or whatever. I don't think that would have been unusual.
It was acceptable in those times still.
You know,
Okay.
you know what, Bracha, earlier on, it uses the word with Judah that he was comforted. We don't
Yeah,
know
right.
how he was comforted. It may have been by going in with another woman, and that's where he was drawing his comfort. So this probably was a normal kind of behavior, you know, in that society.
Okay, normal for that society. And our author, who I'll mention briefly at the end of our text, she doesn't find this surprising at all. The fact that he gives in to his sexual impulses, he's been without for a while now, whatever that while is. And she thinks if you look at how quickly he married Bat-shua, you're not given any story about that she did this and he was impressed with her. It doesn't even give any details about her appearance. So you have this sense, just as he picked Tamar very quickly, that he is a man who is moved by his urges. Okay, we'll keep that in mind. Now, I just want, in case somebody is wondering, what do you think of what Tamar has just done?
I think it's revenge.
Say more about that.
Well, he was devious. He didn't give her Shayla. And he was, and the other two sons also didn't want her. And she felt she was due to have an income later. She wanted to be, to have a son so that she can live and be able to live.
Okay, all right, Frida, yes? I don't see you. All I'm seeing are the pretty faces of Gloria and Yehuda. Okay. Anybody else?
You know what? This is actually an echo of the Leah story, because Leah also entrapped Jacob by disguising herself. And here we have it happening to Jacob's son.
There much can be said about the parallels, absolutely. But is she doing anything wrong?
Actually, no, she's not really doing anything wrong.
Yes,
Because,
why?
well, first of all, she has, been married, and, she is a widow, and and I guess she would be allowed to have relations with somebody else.
But it's not just somebody else.
Well,
No.
somebody in the
You're
family,
halfway. Yes.
some way in the family, so that she can
Yehuda.
continue the seed.
Exactly. She knows, he doesn't know it's her, but she knows that it's him, and he is a candidate for fulfilling the mitzvah of the levirate marriage.
Yeah.
If it was somebody else, then that would have been adultery, because she, as of before that, was not permitted to a stranger. Okay? I just wanted to throw that out there.
But Bracha, don't you see this as an example of Ben Chazirim Tit Chazer? Like, yes, she's forced into this situation because, the people who ostensibly were in control to do right by her at the head end abdicated that responsibility. And true, she didn't betachlis do anything wrong, but by virtue of the fact that she had to literally, go under the cloak of a veil and pretend to be somebody else to get what was duly hers, I feel like it really diminishes her. I understand the tachlis situation she's in and she's looking for a solve, but it just doesn't feel right.
That's interesting. I think that you can look at it that way, but she's forced into this position, but she's got to make a decision. Yeah, I don't like being put in this position, but if I don't do what I'm about to do, I'm not going to be in a better situation. Of course it's wrong that happened, definitely, but I'm not going to keep that down. I'm not going to, suffer because they were wrong. There's no doubt about it. They were wrong. Her two husbands and her father-in-law, absolutely. Gloria.
But what bothers me that she knew what she wanted to do, but she's accomplishing it by trickery. She didn't just say, I'm here, you're there, you owe me something, and this is what you should do to make things right. She just disguised herself, and he figured, okay, he can have his sexual appetite will be satisfied, and nobody would be any the wiser, and there wouldn't be any consequences because of it.
But
anybody want to respond to Gloria?
You know what? We see this happening again. We see this with Naomi and with Ruth. I mean, Naomi actually put Ruth up to some kind of trickery with Boaz. And so here we go again.
Well, maybe it's just a cultural thing.
Well, maybe she has to do it.
Okay.
Maybe she has to do it because Judah should have offered.
Yeah. That's what I would.
I think it's also.
Why didn't she go to Shayla? Why didn't she just try to go to Shayla first? And that was the one she was supposed to go to. She could have seduced him easily.
Well, he was probably.
Why, you know Sheila, Marilyn, that he's seduced?
But he obviously was younger, but he was of age.
Interesting. Very interesting.
But
I-
women didn't, Bracha, women
Go on.
didn't have other power. And I mean, she was entitled. This was her due. And she felt an obligation to continue the seed. And I mean, these are the seeds of our fathers. So
Right on, Helen. I think, Gloria, in this case, that I understand, but if she had gone to him, you know, without that veil and let him know who it was, perhaps he would have refused. And
Sure.
then where would she be? And on two levels, Helen just said it beautifully, on two levels. Personally, she wants to do, even though if she knew what her first husband, that he intentionally kept her from having a child, but she still wanted to fulfill the mitzvah of Pru Urvu and keeping her husband's name alive.
but on
Yeah,
the other
personal.
hand, Bracha,
But-
she has no status unless she has a child
Okay.
in that family.
All right, Marley. No. This is true. But what's wrong in her being aggressive about making sure she has that aggressive? So what Marlene is saying, she isn't necessarily doing it for the purest of reasons, okay? But what Helen said is that she's thinking, and remember I said she came from a family of priesthood, even if it was in Hebrew, but she had these values within her. She's thinking beyond her personal, perhaps. And we begin to think that because of something that's going to happen in a few moments, thousands of years ago. She is thinking of the future of her community. Let's leave that at that. Let's go on. Okay. 23. And Judah said to his friend, let her take it, lest we be put to shame. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. What that's saying is that Judah doesn't feel great about what he did. You know, at the same time that we said he had his urges and it was accepted, he realizes still he's a respected man in that community. And as accepted as it was, people still frowned on it actually a little if you were of a certain class. 24. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told to Judah, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot, and moreover, behold, she is with child by harlotry. And Judah said, are you sitting down? Bring her forth and let her be burnt. Now, why do they automatically assume, why do they refer to her as a zonah, a harlot? Because if she's pregnant, she wasn't allowed to become pregnant unless it was with Sheila or Judah. And they're certainly not going to think of that possibility. So they just assume that. And that's why Judah responds in such a harsh way. Let her be burnt. Why is he calling for that to happen? Now, first of all,
That's probably what the punishment would have been for somebody. They would have been stoned or burnt if they were a
Okay.
harlot.
very good. Usually, in such a situation, the harlot would have been stoned. Why burnt here? Because she was known to be part of a priesthood and there were expectations, and so those women were burnt. Okay, very good.
We're ordinary, if you weren't of a priesthood line, were women burnt if they were harlots?
Just to it was considered it took longer, and the punishment, I mean, stoning wasn't fun, but they felt that was more humiliating, and the pain took a long time to be burned.
It was permissible for Judah to go and take a harlot, but not for a harlot, not for somebody to be a harlot.
No.
You got it, Shelley. Yep.
No, I thought it was because she was not allowed to be with a man who wasn't
Okay.
family. That has nothing to do with her being a harlot per se. I mean, it had nothing to do with harlotry. It had to do with her being the harlot.
Yes, you're right, Gladys. In this particular case, it is because she is not in a position to be doing that. Absolutely, absolutely. But what Shelley's raising is being a harlot at that time. And I want you to know that once the Torah is given, harlotry is out. And we're told there should not be a male prostitute nor a female prostitute. Okay, times did change and things were looked at differently.
Bracha,
yeah.
Let me just add, in addition, if he slanders her this way or takes her that way and they end up, God forbid, burning her, he's rid of her. And it rids him of his obligation, and he comes out looking squeaky clean.
Okay. Yeah, but Judah, who becomes one of our leaders, could he be of that nature? Some of you probably will say yes, but let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. When she was brought forth. Now, also nobody mentioned, he wants her out of the way, not just because he doesn't want the responsibility, but the community will know. Tamar is his daughter-in-law, and that's shaming him and his family. Okay. 25, when she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law saying, by the man whose these are, am I with child. In other words, she sends the three objects with a messenger. And she said, discern, I pray thee. Now the words in Hebrew, hakerna, discern, I pray thee, are the same words that Judah said to Jacob when he said, look at this coat of colors drenched in blood. And we're told that's significant. I said in the beginning of the class that I believe there's a transformation with Yehuda as well. And the parallels are very, very significant. So discern, I pray thee, whose are these? And she knows very well what he was guilty of in those days. Discern, I pray thee, whose are these? The signet and the cords and the staff. And Judah acknowledged them and said, she is more righteous than I. So what has he just done? He not only has stopped her from being burnt, but what else?
He's acknowledging the fact that he had not done the right thing by her and that she was acting in the only way that she could.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But nobody has asked a question that certainly came to my mind. Why does she wait once they bring her out and picture her outside being tied to a post as they're going to burn her? Why does she wait till Judah arrives? Why doesn't she at least make an attempt, even if it's to stall, to say, Judah is the reason I am pregnant? And this speaks to her character.
That would have that would have shamed him and taken away from his status in the community, which we know throughout the story was evident and also important to all concerned.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. As resentful as she was of him, she could have chosen to die a widow, no children, rather than humiliate her father-in-law who betrayed her and her first son. And who knows? Maybe you could say maybe he tied Sheila up somewhere and he's betraying him too, not giving him the opportunity to sustain his eldest brother. But Judah acknowledges. Now, very interesting. Judah acknowledged them and said, "She is more righteous than I, for as much as I gave her not to Sheila, my son." He realizes his mistake. Now, what does it go on to say? And he knew her again no more. There are two ways that that sentence is understood. What could they be?
Where?
He did not continue to have sex with her. Could we imagine that they stay married? And we have reason because we see what happens in coming Prakim, and when they go back down to Egypt with Jacob, that their sons are with them, that he knew her again no more, that he did not continue to have sex with her, or he did not, if you look at the Hebrew, stop having sex with her. That's what I mean. The English doesn't make that clear. It can be understood in both ways, that he stops having after that incident, or that he doesn't stop at all. So what would you think would happen? Would it be a case of him continuing to have relations with her or not? Just imagine on a very human level what you think would happen. These two people had this, they have two children, twins, we're going to see, and then they do continue. Is it going to be a life filled with normal marital happenings? Yes, if yes, why? If not,
Bracha, what does Yisach mean?
continued. But it also means to stop. It has two meanings. That's why I'm saying it can be taken both ways. Anybody?
No, he didn't continue to have sex with her.
Why,
and why? Because he knew he was wrong. He knew what he did was wrong. And he realized that, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing. We're married. We have these two children, and I'm going to respect her for what she did for me.
Yafet. Shelley, you're right up there with Nachmanides and Radak, because they also said, he didn't. I've always known why I care for you so much. And he's embarrassed because she still is his kala. Now, kala means what?
Bride.
It means bride. So what else does it mean? You say, this is my kala, a father-in-law or a mother-in-law says that about their daughter-in-law. So interesting. In this case, he's thinking she is his kala, but he's more interested in the fact that she is his daughter-in-law. And he's embarrassed. He is embarrassed. Rappaport feels, as I said earlier, that this isn't somebody, Yehuda, who would have controlled his impulses. Now, she's not condemning him for that. She's not. But she goes on to say, Rappaport, that if we think about this story in the larger context, what Helen raised earlier, that this isn't just children of Jacob involved, but it's the future of Am Yisrael, that they probably did not, because they realized their mission and it was an uncomfortable situation. But what has gone on here is Tamar has gone, even considering what Sigal said earlier, she's gone from victim turned victor, harlot turned heroine, and Judah has made a turnabout. That Hakerna obviously impacted on him, and he realized, hey, look what I've been doing, the same thing I did to my dad years ago. I was deceitful. I betrayed Tamar. I betrayed my eldest son. And the fact that he does come forward says a lot about his character. And he is then eventually able to reunite with his brothers and father. But let's just continue and see how this ends. 27, and it came to pass in the time of her travail that behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass that one put out a hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. And it came to pass as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. So similar to what happened with Jacob and Esau, that one's on his way out, but the other pulls him and he gets out. And she said, wherefore hast thou made a breach for yourself? Paratzta. Therefore his name was called Peretz, which means to break through. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerach. Zarach. What does Zareach mean? Hashemesh Zorachat?
Shine.
Shines. Okay, so we said earlier that names are where a parent is at times, what's going on in their heart and their mind. And certainly in this case, these names reflect Tamar in her breaking through and not feeling stifled by being a timid and accepting her destiny. She broke through. Perhaps there's a breaking through of Judah and an opening of his eyes, and certainly Zerach, that they have brought back what could have been the end of that family line. And we do think of Tamar and Judah as the ancestors, again, of King David, a descendant of Perez. If you continue looking a few prakim beyond, we will see that that is the line. And so a people has come about once again because of a weird happening. I'm using weird, not sure. Okay, now, just a few more minutes. I want to say something about Sandra Rappaport, who has guided me throughout these 3 weeks. Why did I immediately take to her when I read her book is that she does something more than what the Midrash does, I believe. The Midrash gives us details and fills in gaps. And sometimes people are hesitant to accept that because it's not fact. I'm not looking for facts. I'm looking for details that make us think. And no one is saying that it's absolutely right or wrong. So, what happens is that Rappaport, she doesn't just fill in gaps, but she does, well, I want you to tell me. Does everybody see this? Hello?
Yes, I see it.
Okay. So this is from the text, and she's imagining, look at the third line, or the second. Tamar was about to act in a way that was utterly alien to her character. She would have had to talk to herself, to give herself false courage, to rationalize in the strongest possible terms her upcoming behavior. She might have thought the following: Judah has no intention of marrying me to Sheila. If I don't force his hand, I will molder away in my widow's weeds until I am old and ugly. I will die without ever having had a man hold me in real passion, without having borne and held my own child to my breast. Make the move, Tamar. What have you got to lose? Make the move. And she goes on in a similar vein, imagining what Judah would have said when he hears that she's pregnant. Upon hearing that she was found out to be pregnant, his thinking ran perhaps along these lines: oh, for heaven's sake, this girl has brought me nothing but trouble from the first moment I brought her into my house. And she was such a quiet and lovely thing. Wouldn't even say boo to a goose. I can't figure it. My two sons were married to her for a week or two apiece, and wham, both boys died on the spot. There was no way I ever was going to let her near Sheila, my third boy. I thought sending her away was a good solution. I figured she'd sit out the years quietly in her father's house. And my plan was working. Not a peep has been heard out of her for over 2 years. Now this, well, she's brought this sentence on herself. There's nothing for it but for her to be judged an adulteress, take her out and burn her. Perhaps now I'll finally have some peace. I bring this for you because I believe what she's doing is something that I thank God for, that I do when I'm reading the actual text. I have come over so many years to see the characters as real people and see that they are very human. And that's how we glean from our texts. And when you read Rappaport's books, that's her strength, in that these aren't distant from real life. And that says a lot. Aside from the fact that what she's doing is what we call in Hebrew begova einayim, that she's making a text which sometimes today people feel is very foreign. She's bringing it to the level that any and everyone of Israel can understand these episodes. I want to close with two things. First of all, Marilyn, I saw you in the choir just 2 days ago singing with the National Women's League. Beautiful, beautiful. Kol hakavod. Secondly, tomorrow night, we usher in Tisha B'Av. And I am going to share one more thing. Just a second. Okay. I took this picture yesterday. Throughout Jerusalem, there are billboards, I think much more than you see in Toronto, perhaps downtown you do. And these are posters that people go around and with glue put them on. I couldn't believe when I saw this one just yesterday. Ahavat Chinam. We're told that the Churban Beit HaMikdash was because, not really just because of the Babylonians, but it was more because of Sinat Chinam, the baseless hatred that was going on between our people, to a point that our nation just fell apart. So there is a movement that looks to put the stress on Ahavat Chinam, love without cause. Chinam literally means for free. You have nothing to lose. Ahavat Chinam. We, some people question those who live in modern Yerushalayim, whether we still need to fast because it's alive and well. It is, but there, as we have said, it's a work in progress, whether we're here, whether we're across the ocean. And so there should be a day to reflect and continue to feel what we are capable of, the sinat chinam, but look to make it constructive and do all that we can to bring ahava. And that sounds a little corny, but that's okay. Now, why it was unbelievable to me, I don't expect anyone to remember, but a couple of months ago, in talking about bringing Yerushalayim Shel Mala and Yerushalayim Shel Mata on Yom Yerushalayim, I talked about different personalities within the Jewish people being able to unite around our Jewish sources, whether they are Dati or not Dati, and mentioned in the same session Ruth Calderon, the woman who was in the Knesset and read a page of Talmud. And then I mentioned this fellow underneath Ahavat Chinam, Kobi Oz. Kobi Oz is a very, very popular singer. He had been in a band and then went out on his own. And most of his songs now, though he is still a Chiloni, he's not Shomer Mitzvot in the traditional way, but he is certainly taken to delving into our sources. So when I saw that sign, Ahavat Chinam, and then Kobi Oz underneath, I felt, wow. Part of that is somebody having been open to a culture that sometimes excludes the Chiloni. And by the way, the Chiloni can exclude the Dati. There's no time for that, folks. We have to find a way to come together. And I leave you with that and pray that you'll continue to be well. Take care.
Thank you.